Welcome to another Ronel Talks Money show. I just want to remind you, please subscribe to the channel and also go to the link in the description field where you will find our monthly giveaway competition that you can enter and where you can also win one of my books, Financially Fit and Wealthy. Now, for those of you who are following the Ronel Talks Money shows, you would remember that in 2020, we had David Melvill with us and we were discussing investing in gold. So today, David is back with us and today we are going to talk about investing in silver. I think for a lot of people, maybe not that familiar or well known than what investing in gold would be. And I think that is why we want to discuss it today so that you also can learn more about how you can invest in silver and what it is all about. So David, welcome back and thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Ronel. It's always a privilege and special opportunity.
Okay, so maybe you must first just kick off and just tell us a little bit more. How did you get involved in silver?
So perhaps I should begin by saying I was negative towards silver. Now, I know that's not the best way to kick off, but effectively, I thought silver was overpriced and not really worth comparing, especially when you measured against gold. And that was largely due to the fact that gold's refining costs are relatively low, where silver, there's a shortage of it and the costs are high. And furthermore, it's subject to VAT, which used to price it out of the market. And I was a firm persuader of people not to invest in silver. So I did meet a friend, Henri Duplessis, about 4 years ago. He lives in the little hamlet of Prince Alfred Hamlet. And he was passionate about silver and he came to visit me. And because of his enthusiasm, it became almost contagious. But I still didn't make the hurdle over from gold to silver. And so he left it at that. And then one day he came to visit me on the farm. And he said, this time I'm coming to buy some gold. So I thought, he's really getting the balance right. He's been a silver man all his life. And now he wants some gold. I better wake up. And so I started reading more and learning more from him. So I have a big debt of gratitude to him for his persuasive powers. And then one day, someone who I was working in the gold network said to me, I've got this monster box. It's 500 silver coins. I need to share it. Will you help me try and find some buyers that we can dispose of them? So by buying a monster box, you buy the very best possible price by buying 500 coins. But then there was an onus to try and move them. So I rallied around to my clients, investors, and I said, are any of you interested? And surprisingly, there were a lot who were enthusiastic and said, yes, we want some. Well, I went back to him the next morning and said, right, we need to go. Got these orders. And he said, sorry, they're all sold out. Wow. I was a bit devastated. Here I've got all enthusiastic and now I have no stock. So that meant I had to do a bit more research. And a good friend, Henri Duplessis, said, look, and speak to my friend Zoltan Birdie. He's really the best in South Africa when it comes to silver. So I dutifully did so and discovered that Zoltan is a lovely man. He's Polish by descent, but he's become a very good South African and really understands the silver market. So a little bit of interaction with him really helped a lot. He helped me with supply. Perhaps also just to add, he's recently written a book called Going for Gold, a guide for South African precious metal investors, which covers both gold and silver. So that's a long introduction of how I got involved into silver. But I think it's important because it's really someone who was vehemently against silver who's become a passionate investor about silver.
I think what I enjoy about this story is just, again, to see that diversifying your portfolio coming through strongly. And I think that is also important. And I think sometimes for people, they might not be interested in a certain asset class at a certain point for whatever the reason might be. But as their investment journey continues, they sometimes see, okay, but now there is a need for me to venture into something else or to add something else to my portfolio. So thank you for sharing. But then, David, you should maybe also just tell us a little bit more about the process of investing in silver in layman's terms, because I think a lot of people are not really familiar with it.
Yes, you're right. I think it's maybe an apathy, or it's maybe just a lack of knowledge, because South Africa doesn't produce silver. So we don't have a vested interest or a link like a country like Mexico would be one of the biggest miners of silver, and America and Peru. So we don't have that affinity. So there would be two ways of buying silver, either through silver coins. And I've got two little coins here just to illustrate. Here is a lovely silver Kruger Rand. And here is a British Britannia. And they're all 1 ounce coins. So beautiful coins, easy. They come in nice little capsules like this to protect them and keep them in their mint condition. Or one can buy a whole tube of them. All 25 is the preferred packaging, and obviously also the way of achieving your very best possible price. And then those investors that are really big, they can buy what we call a monster box. It really is a giant thing. It takes 20 tubes, and it's a real safety box. So you have 500 coins in a box like this. So that's obviously a preferred way of investing for South Africans who would like to know that they've got a piece of metal that's easy to recognize and easy to trade and get some cash in times of need. And of course, there are many countries that do make lovely silver coins. I've mentioned the British Britannia, there's the Canadian maple leaf, there's the American eagle, golden eagle, there's the Australian kangaroo, and Mexico and countries like even Somalia and China also have a silver coin. Now, in addition to silver coins, one can buy what's called a bar, a silver bar. And these typically will come in 100 grams or a kilogram bar. And those are for the investors that say, we're just a long-term investor. We don't need coins. We're going to stick with the metal in big form. And of course, that is the most cost-effective way to acquire silver. Because the manufacturing and refining costs of coins is expensive, the cost of bars is a fraction of that cost. So for the discerning investor, that's obviously a better way to go. Yeah. Maybe I should say right at the outset, the cost of refining is very expensive. The cost of gold from the Rand refinery in Germiston is the spot price of gold plus 4.5%. But because South Africa doesn't mine gold and we have to import all our gold from the USA, where our silver Kruger Rands are made, we have a manufacturing cost that can range from anything from 20% to 30% over and above the spot price of silver. And then further to that, there's a 15% of VAT that's added. Unlike gold, where gold is exempt from any value-added tax because it's deemed legal tender, which is money, where silver is not in the same basis. So if one is going to buy, it's probably best to buy over in the retail market, which would be typically a coin shop, or through an internet shop where one can find silver Kruger Rands or silver coins. One would then typically take delivery either by taking it over the counter, or it would be sent to you with a courier service. I think maybe I should just say the silver bars, I assist investors by buying in Zurich, in Switzerland, where we would pay 9% all-inclusive of refining, manufacturing, marketing costs, and there's also no VAT. So that obviously is a preferred way for the big investor. But typically most South Africans would be small investors initially, and therefore the coin is a wonderful way to go. typically you would pay something like 600 Rand or slightly less for a 1 ounce Kruger Rand like this. But the preferred way is to buy a tube, because then you're going to get the best possible price. Maybe just to say, those 1 kilogram bars, to make that investment, you have to invest at least $10,000 or 150,000 Rand into an account. And then you would pay whatever the price is for that day. But that's the minimum to open an account. And those bars are then stored and vaulted and insured for you in Switzerland. So they're very safe.
A minimum amount if you just want to buy the coins.
Yes, so 1 coin, you could go to over the counter and pay 600 Rand to buy 1 coin. But ideally, one needs to buy a tube of 25, because that's where you ensure the very best possible price.
Okay, so there you can obviously start off with a much smaller amount if you just want to get into it.
That's quite right. And that's what's nice about silver. It's accessible to the man in the street.
Absolutely. David, we had, like I said, this discussion about gold previously, and I want to encourage the viewers, if you have missed that, please go back onto my YouTube channel and you will find that discussion where you can learn a lot more about investing in gold. But David, you can maybe just explain to us a little bit, how is it different investing in silver compared to investing in gold?
Yeah, and that is a good question. I'm fishing out a little 1 ounce coin here. So here is the 1 ounce Kruger Rand. It's slightly smaller than the 1 ounce of the silver version, but this would typically be costing somewhere like 27,500 to 28,000 Rand if you were purchasing it today. So it's a lot more expensive and also therefore not so readily accessible to the person in the street who wants to start a little investment. And so silver is like encouraging the man in the street to, well, let's just start in small ways. Gold in South Africa has lots of supply, so there's never really a shortage. But because silver is in high demand at the moment, typically we have to wait a month to get silver Kruger Rands. The Rand refinery only imports once a month, or maybe that's only the allocation that they get. A once a month order is shipped in from the United States. But I do want to say, and perhaps the most important lesson, that both gold and silver are what we call real money. Real money because it cannot be printed or manufactured artificially. This is the genuine item. And this is perhaps what's known as what I would say God's money. The Bible only talks about gold and silver as money. It has no other terms for money. So if one forgets everything that I said today and just remembers that gold and silver is money, you do well.
David, and then tell me, you mentioned now about the price of silver, but how would I typically determine the price of silver?
Yes, and Ronel, maybe I erred a little bit there. I should have finished by saying, so now we know that the form of real money is gold and silver, but is it an investment or is it money? What is it? You know, this is a discussion. Is it actually a currency or is it an asset class? And in reality, gold and silver really is just the purest form of money. So when one invests in money, you're not so much making an investment as you are just ensuring that you're protecting the purchasing power of your Rand. And why do you need to do that? Well, we have this terrible enemy called inflation that devalues or depreciates the purchasing power of the Rand. And gold and silver is the perfect antithesis to provide that protection. Okay, sorry about that, but I thought it was important. I've forgotten to mention that in your last question. So how do we determine the silver price today? So in London, each morning and afternoon, there's a group of a committee that comes together called the London Bullion Market Association, and they really represent the 5 biggest gold and silver dealers in London, and they determine the price of silver. And then that represents the purchase price for a large pool of purchases and sales during the course of the day. And that is what's known as the spot price of silver. Then the Reserve Bank, the South African Reserve Bank, they determine the rand-dollar exchange rate. And typically, let's say that would be 14 rand. Oh, and I meant to say that the dollar price of silver this morning is $28. So if we take $28 and we multiply that by 14 rand, the cost or the spot price of silver is $392. Sorry, 392 rand, beg your pardon. But that's just the beginning. Then that's, if you want to picture it, it's a lump of raw silver. Now it needs to be refined and manufactured. And that typically is a charge of a minimum of 20%, sometimes because of supply not being available, that can even go up to 30% is what people are prepared to pay in order to get silver. So let's just assume we worked on 25%. That's another 98 rand for the refining and manufacturing. It makes it 490 rand. And then times 15% VAT is another 73 rand 50. And that equals 564 rand. So roughly 600 rand for an ounce of a good quality silver coin is what you would be looking to pay.
Yeah, that is actually interesting to know, because I think we sometimes just hear these prices quoted on the news or in the newspapers, and we do not always know exactly how it is determined. So thank you for sharing that. And David, then what about the factors? What kind of factors would impact on the silver price?
Yes, and they really are the big drivers of the price. So you're so right. The old adage of supply and demand is huge. So the silver mines typically have not been producing or mining enough silver, so there's a shortage of silver. And it seems on the other side, the investors' desire for silver seems almost insatiable. So this is an unusual time where we have the squeeze, limited supply and maximum demand. So that has, you would think, fueled the prices of silver a lot more, and yet silver has managed to remain reasonably stable. But it definitely has seen over the last year a huge increase in the price of silver. And that's probably more because of monetary policy, where interest rates are low or zero almost across the world today. There's a lot of geopolitical tension. We look at situations like Israel and world terrorism and war. Those will all add and fuel the price of silver. And then perhaps a bit closer to home, we're looking at the fear of the possible collapses in asset prices, where property and stock markets and bond markets have been artificially fueled because of all this printing of money, creating what they call economic stimulus. And to me, it's reminded of pumping up a balloon. You're pumping, where all this money is got to find a home. And so it goes into asset prices and artificially boosts them, which is not good. And typically a balloon, it doesn't just deflate, it bursts. And that can be very worrying. And more investors are becoming circumspect of this and looking to take out insurance in the form of gold and silver as a way of protecting their currencies. Obviously, inflation is a real bugbear and the ultimate evil of destroying the purchasing power of people's savings. If your money is sitting in the bank and you're not getting a reasonable return interest that's outperforming inflation, then your money is devaluing or being debased. And those would be good opportunities and reasons why you would want to purchase some silver to protect your purchasing power. And then there are other things, without getting too technical, but there's economic data that flows, and one looks at typically the unemployment and the GDP growth results of countries. And these are all looking rather weak and reduced. And of course, then as a result, we see the weakness in currencies. We see currency wars beginning, like for instance, America and China. And especially as a result, we're seeing more and more dollar weakness taking place. And ultimately, the dollar has been the base or the benchmark of the world's security. But when that is losing its value, then people get very worried and would typically then start reverting to gold and silver as a way of protecting one's purchasing power and buying the best possible insurance.
But then also, I think you have now already touched on quite a couple of the pros and cons of silver, but maybe you can just summarize it again for us, specifically the pros and cons.
Yes, gladly. So again, my lesson for the day, silver is money. It's the purest form of money. And silver and gold are the essential components of every portfolio. So I don't believe it's an optional extra. I've got equities, I've got property. I don't need gold or silver. I think a balanced portfolio should have exposure to real money. And of course, it's also a protection against all those factors that we've mentioned. And lastly, it has no risk. It's not a third-party risk dependent on other people's ability to make good. 1 ounce of silver is just 1 ounce of silver. It's never going to be any more. It's never going to be any less. So you know what you're purchasing. It has no risk associated with it. The cons or the downside of silver, those that reason against it would say silver has no yield because it doesn't pay you any interest, and there's definitely no stream of dividends. But then again, it's not designed to do that. It's designed to protect your purchasing power. It's really just a capital appreciation.
You can almost view it as type of a hedge that you can use kind of in combination with all your other investments and asset classes, basically just to protect yourself from any devaluations in any other class. Asset classes.
Yes, and that's so true. You know, it's the one asset that's been with man from the very beginning. It's been around for 5,000-6,000 years, and it's never gone away. It's continued belief in its ability to actually act as a good money form and also ultimately as an investment, as a secondary condition.
Yeah. So I think then if you think about it, the biggest difference almost between silver compared to your other asset classes would be that you are not going to receive some kind of income in the form of interest or dividends or rental income, but it's all about that capital appreciation. And that is basically where you are going to receive your benefit from.
That's quite right.
Okay, and then I think a very important question, especially now after lockdown, where we've seen so many scammers coming through. I think people will also be quite skeptical in terms of who can I give my money to, or where do I buy silver from that I know it is safe and nobody's running away with my money. So maybe you can just share with us a little bit, how can people ensure that they are dealing with, I don't know if you call it dealers or people that are basically legitimate and that's the real deal?
Yes, so that's very important in today. As you say, there are scammers out there who will take you for a good joyride. And this can even be sometimes credible shops. So, for instance, there are shops like the Scoin Shop or Mr. Kruger, which are very credible companies, but sometimes if there's a short supply, they will push the price up. Now, I don't have a problem if they say to him, listen, this is 1,000 Rand for this Kruger Rand. That's fine as long as you tell them that's today's price because we don't have stock. And so because there's a shortage pushing the price up, one should always be more transparent and say, listen, the normal price is 600 Rand for this coin, but because we don't have supply and we don't know when we're getting the next supply, we're pushing the price up. Then the potential buyer has the chance to say, well, maybe I'm going to skip today. Will you let me know when your next supply arrives? And then I'll purchase. I tend to say that people that are on the internet and don't have the overheads of a big shop will possibly give you your better price because they don't have to pay all those overheads. And one really just needs to do your homework, looking carefully at who you're going to entrust your money to. And so therefore it is incumbent on you to either make use of a good advisor who can indicate to you who you should be using, or alternatively do really good homework that you don't get caught.
That is so important. And I just want to emphasize again to the viewers, remember that nothing that we are discussing here is financial advice. We are just educating you, giving you some information and tips and knowledge sharing. So please go back to your financial advisor or whoever you trust and check the facts with them. Make sure that you do your homework and you just don't trust anybody with your money. So always be on the lookout to make sure that you avoid any potential scams. Then, David, I also want to ask you, you have now mentioned about the minimum investment requirement that is quite low. And I think that will encourage a lot of people to say, okay, but I should maybe start off a small investment in silver. But typically, what would the process be for somebody who said, okay, I want to start this? How and where do they start?
Yeah. So maybe just to quote, I've got a friend who lives in the UK now, and he goes and visits the shop once a month. And whatever savings he's been able to save, he will go and buy a small little gold coin or a couple of silver coins. So he's built a relationship with a good shopkeeper, and his aim is to build this portfolio slowly. So one could do that quite easily by visiting one of the coin shops and making regular monthly purchases. It's not going to make the shop rich, but it's a nice opportunity for him to grow and learn and so develop a little portfolio. So, I don't think there's anything wrong in someone saying, I just want to make my first investment. I've got 600 Rand. Can I buy that silver coin, please? And I can't see why shops won't be willing to sell you one. Of course, they would want to encourage you to come back later next time and get the 25 in the tube. But that's fine, all in due course. Build a relationship, get to know who the provider is, and make sure that you're comfortable. I suppose the real acid test, though, is when I suddenly need money because something's gone wrong and I take my coin back to the shop, how much are you going to give me in return for it? And that's actually crucial, because that's really the acid test of saying, okay, I know this is a good investment because I can liquidate it quickly. So I've found a really good online supplier who says to me, David, I'm here to make a little bit of money on the sale and a bit on the purchase. So I buy the secondhand, I buy back from my existing clients. I give them an undertaking that I'll guarantee to pay a good price. And typically I'll also pay back the VAT, provided they purchase the silver Kruger Rands or whatever silver coin from me. And that, I think, was a real clincher for me, saying, okay, I can do business on the basis that I have a good guarantee, because it's no good you've got silver, but nobody wants to accept it.
Yeah, absolutely. But because I wanted to ask you, how easy is it to sell your silver?
Yes, I think it's as easy as the relationship that you've built up. I understand a shopkeeper that says, listen, you didn't buy those coins from me, so I'm not going to give you any special deal. But I'll buy them back at a reduced price. And typically most shops want to only pay the spot price of silver as they would pay the spot price of gold. But of course, with silver, there's huge expenses of refining and manufacturing. So you really need to find a dealer who's prepared to pay you a good percentage of that, because the coin is being only given its silver content doesn't mean to say it's not valuable and can't be sold in the secondhand market. So maybe that should be your first question. When you go to buy a coin, say, if I had a coin today and I was bringing it back to you, how much would you give me in exchange for this coin? And then you know what the base price is starting out on this venture. And maybe then engage one or two shops to say, okay, I like who I'm dealing with, and I think I could trust this person, and therefore I will do business with them.
Okay, now I think that is good advice. And then also you've now mentioned that the costs involved in silver is higher because it's not produced locally in South Africa. But are there any other costs involved in terms of fees or anything else that you need to factor in?
Yeah, so I think maybe just to summarize, we said there's the spot price of silver plus the refining and manufacturing, which can be anything from 20 to 30%, because obviously there's transport costs, there is insurance costs, delivery charges, and so typically, and over and above that is the 15% of the VAT. So those are things that one needs to know, and maybe it's always good to ask the dealer, how do you determine your price? How do you get there so that I can fully understand what I'm purchasing? And that way you're able to make an informed decision and you won't be caught off guard.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think it's also sometimes good to maybe talk to a couple of shops and basically just understand, because there might be differences in prices and costs, and then you can basically make the best decision and pay the lower fee. But then also, if I think about the tax implications, because now you said there's no kind of income generating, so you would obviously not be paying any income tax, but there's obviously a capital appreciation. So I assume there would be some capital gains tax applicable, or what would the tax implications be?
Sorry for running away like that. But I did want to quickly grab a book that I'm reading at the moment and just show you. Can you see that? Is that clear enough?
Oh, it's maybe a bit too close, a bit further away.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, it seems like it's battling, but it really is the book that I referred to earlier called Going for Gold, a guide for South African precious metal investors. So it focuses on both gold and silver, and it's by Zoltan Erdy. And he, in a particular chapter, deals with what about capital gains tax? And he refers to an advocate who's looked closely at the matter, and he basically says, because silver is held outside of the financial system, it's money and not an investment, so it's really a currency that we're using. It should not be subject to capital gains tax. So that's his expert opinion. I'm not saying it isn't, and so ultimately one needs to establish that with your own tax consultant. What is the view, and put it to the test. But silver is regarded as legal tender across the world, and in most countries there's no capital gains tax. I think especially in Britain there's no income tax, there's no value added tax, and there's no capital gains tax. So I would think a country like that encourages their citizens to make investments in silver, and seeing silver then as legal tender.
Okay, so I think then once again for the viewers, go back to your tax consultant. Remember, there's always different views. Your personal tax situation might be a lot different from the person next to you. So just go back to your tax consultant or some tax expert and just confirm what if there would be any implications for you personally. Then I also know, David, if I think about gold always seems to perform very well during a recession, and I think that is one of the benefits of gold, while it seems that with silver, the price is declining during a recession. So maybe you can just explain to us what would the reason be for that?
So Ronel, your observation is most accurate. Silver typically is a bit of a laggard when it comes to a recession, because silver is used both for industrial purposes as well as money or investment purposes, whereas gold has very little application for industry. So gold is the ultimate hedge in a recession, and immediately there's a flight of money to gold in tough times, because they know this is going to be your anchor or your best insurance policy going through that recession or currency collapse. So silver does take a bit of time because obviously the demand for industry would slow off and the silver price would reduce. But ultimately, it would then rally back a few months later as people begin to realize it is just as good as gold as a protection against the crisis and trouble that one's experiencing, because silver is also a safe haven. I tend to see my role as a gold and silver friendly promoter. So I tend to advise investors to have a portion available. And, you don't want to buy insurance when the trouble arises. You want to have put it in place beforehand. Otherwise, it's no good. So one has to be a bit contrarian and say, right, the rest of the world might not be buying gold and silver, and they're sticking to the traditional assets of property and equity markets and bonds. But I'm going to take a small portion, whether it's 5 or 10% of my total assets, and start investing in gold and silver as my hedge.
Okay. Now, I think that is actually very good advice. And then, David, I want to finish off with the last question. You are obviously very experienced when it comes to gold and silver, but when would you say when is a good time to invest in silver?
Okay, I like that question. And I have a simple answer initially, so forgive me. But I would say if you have no silver, now is a good time because you don't have any insurance. So make a little investment and allow it to grow on you. I've found the more you begin to be acquainted with something, the more you appreciate it, the more your confidence is in store, and you would tend to add to the portfolio. But there is, of course, a very good way of checking how do we know when silver is a good time to buy. And that's really what you're asking. So silver and gold have had a long-term relationship. 50 ounces of silver equals 1 ounce of gold. Now that's what we call a long-term relationship over the last 100 years. So that's a very good benchmark to use. So let's look at it at the moment. If we take the price of gold this morning, it's $1,880. And if I divide it by $28, the price of 1 ounce of silver, it's 67 times. So you need to exchange 67 of these to get, whoopsie, 1 gold coin. And that is more than the long-term average of 50. So you as a knowledgeable accountant will know things revert back to the mean. So if the average was 50 and today you've got to pay 67, it means silver is hugely undervalued and there's a greater chance that it's going to get back to its long-term average of 50. So gold is expensive by comparison. Silver is inexpensive and a much better attractive offer to be investing in. Perhaps a little bit more on the gold ratios because it is quite fascinating. Silver went off the silver standard in 1935 already. So a long time ago, gold only went off the gold standard in 1971. But at the time in 1920, 1 ounce of gold cost $20. There was no inflation, so it was fixed like that for a long time. And 1 ounce of silver was $1.30. So you literally gave 15 ounces of silver to get 1 ounce of gold. And many silver investors will say that's what we're going to go back to. So forget about the last 100 years of 50 to 1. We're looking for the ultimate of 15 to 1, where it used to be before man started fiddling with the purchasing power of silver and gold. And so there are many enthusiasts believe that's where it's going back to. And perhaps another illustration, in 1980, when gold was at its pinnacle of $850 an ounce, silver was also right up there at $50 an ounce. And again, that relationship was 15 to 1. So it's quite possible that in the height of when they both are really running well, they will get back to that ratio of 15 to 1.
Okay, David, that is so interesting. And I think we've really learned a lot from you today about another yeah, like you say, is it an investment? Is it an asset class? But like you mentioned, it's money. So I think that it's a lot of valuable information, and I want to thank you for again spending some time with us, educate us about investing in silver, something that I think a lot of people might not be that familiar with, but definitely something that a lot of people should consider. And what I definitely enjoyed or learned about today is that you can start off with a very small amount. So it's really accessible to a lot of people. And similar to gold, it is something that you can really use to your benefit within your bigger portfolio, and you can diversify, but you can also have that hedge or that asset protection that will actually over time appreciate in value. So to all the viewers, I hope you have learned a lot about something that might be new to you. And then I am going to share David's contact details if you want to get in touch with him and want him to assist you to start building your portfolio of silver. And then I just want to remind you again, remember to subscribe to the channel and enter the book giveaway competition. And yes, give us any comments or questions in the comments field. And then we will see you again at the next Ronel Talks Money show.